Welcome to Drinking Bros, presented by GhostBed.com. Welcome to Drinkin' Bros Sports, kids. Happy to have you here today. Bob, we got a huge guest today.
Yeah. I'd say one of the biggest sports personalities we've had on the network.
Well, biggest sports personalities probably in the history of the business, to be honest with you. It's Armen Keteyian. How are you, sir?
I'm good, guys. How are you?
Man, I'm unbelievable. Grew up with you as a child, and here's the thing: you just kept going forever and ever and ever, and you haven't stopped. I feel like you've seen and done every single thing in sports, and even up until recently, I just saw you in the Tiger Woods doc, based on your book that you helped produce, that you were actually in itself. I guess let's start there and then we'll rewind because that's fresh on everybody's minds. When I watched that doc, I learned a lot about Tiger Woods that I had no idea about, including the backstory with Earl and what he was doing as Tiger was a kid. Did you guys know, covering him all these years, about Tiger Woods?
No, not really. When Jeff and I originally came up with the idea, actually it was our agent's idea. We were coming off The System, the book that we had done on big time college football. And frankly, I wasn't really looking for another project. I was pretty knee deep at 60 Minutes and 60 Minutes Sports. And The System was interesting because the proposal for that book ran 60 pages, trying to explain what kind of landscape we were going to cover. The Tiger Woods proposal, honestly, was 4 pages long. And it was basically, when our agent brought it up, Jeff and I both said, God, hasn't there been enough books written about Tiger Woods? But when we did some digging, we realized that there had been a lot of books, but they were all written in very specific parts of his life. So either growing up, just as he turned pro, Earl had obviously written 3 different books. There was another book written, for example, right after his huge run in the early 2000s, and then another book written after the car crash in 2009. But no one had ever done this immersive 360-degree look at Tiger's life. And the more that we looked at it, the more we realized it was the kind of biography that we wanted to write. We were both looking to take a pretty big swing at something much like The System, and we thought, okay, this is the guy. Sort of, if you're going to climb a mountain, Mount Woods is a pretty good place to go. Importantly, we asked for 3 years to do it because we knew normally you can do a book in 18 months or 2 years. We asked for that additional year because we knew that we just had to do a lot of reading and kind of bring ourselves up to speed with everything that had been written previously. And I think what you found in the doc is really the result of a lot of our reporting. Was we just found people that had never talked publicly about Tiger's life before, whether it was, Adina Gravel, his first serious true love girlfriend in high school, or the woman that rented the house at the Masters to Tiger and Earl for several years in a row before she really got sick of how they were treating the house. So certainly I'd seen him multiple times on television. I was in awe of his talent, but I didn't think anybody really knew who the real Tiger Woods was, because Tiger's so careful about his public image. And the thing that really intrigued me the most was, what's the price of genius? What is the cost of being the absolute best in your world? And I think that's what the doc was so successful in answering, those 2 questions, based on a lot of our reporting in the book.
Yeah, I agree. And it's funny you said that. What is the cost of genius? Because I had said that to my wife. Is it possible? I did. Were
you talking about yourself?
Well,
probably, but
probably yes. I mean, I've done a lot of crazy shit, like book-wise. Like, dude, a book is a mountain. Like, I've been #1 in the world having a book. You have as well. It is so impossible when you look back at it. You're like, holy shit, I can't believe this happened. But we were talking about just the cost of a book, let alone the movies and podcasts and all that other stuff.
Yeah.
you have to sacrifice so much that I turned to her after part one and I said, I don't think it's possible to make it to that level. And I'm not Tiger Woods, obviously, without being an asshole. Because she'll get on me sometimes about the way I treat people or if I'm not happy if something's right. And I've fully admitted it all the time where I'm like, yes, dude, I want perfect audio, sound, book-wise. Like, I want the best of the best at all times because I want to be the best. With Tiger, you know, looking back at it, that was my first takeaway of I turned to her and I was like, you see what the cost is of all this shit? Like, I don't know that you can be nice. And then the interesting part about it was that was part one.
I would argue that nice is different than, I think you can be respectful to people. I think you can be, and you're right, that one of the things that Jeff and I did was we never put ourselves in Tiger's shoes and tried to judge him, because I don't think it's possible to judge what it's like to be Tiger Woods, to be 21 years old and 22 years old, being in Las Vegas with Michael Jordan and Charles Barkley and living that life where every girl that you meet or they bring to you at one of the clubs wants to sleep with you. It's just a world in which very, very few people live in. I would argue that there's a certain level of humanity that comes into these moments that Tiger was just not able to portray at all. And I think that goes back to Earl and Earl's teachings. So nice is one thing, but I don't think Tiger showed much respect for people that did absolutely life-altering things for him. And then when their period of time of usefulness had evaporated, I mean, they were summarily excommunicated from, you know, the Church of Woods. And I have issues with that, but that's what the doc showed. And I think that's what our reporting showed, is that's part of the price of genius. That's part of the price that is paid sometimes by athletes in the way they treat other people. It doesn't make it right. It just makes it the way it is.
Yeah. And look, I'm not saying I've like an asshole and discarded people and anything else. I'm just saying like the work and the process of all of this stuff. I just want it to go correctly. And if we work together or for me or whatever, like, hey, that's what you're getting paid to do that job. And then let's move on with our lives. But in part two of the doc, that's when I had a different outlook of him, where I had no idea the stuff about his father was going on and everything else. And then at the end, I felt bad for Tiger Woods, which was crazy. And I don't know if that was the intent of you guys writing the book or the intent of the filmmaker, but I had a totally different outlook of who he was because of, you know, what was going on behind the scenes.
You're absolutely right. There were times when Jeff and I were writing the book, when we were about 2/3 of the way through it, where we would have these very serious conversations about, I don't like this guy. You know, I mean, it's really hard to like him right now. And if you're a reader, and we're thinking in the mindset of the reader, is like, wow, this book's going to grind to a complete halt here just because of the way that Tiger is treating people at this point in time. But by the end, after everything he goes through, those last 4 or 5 years of his life leading up to, you know, basically when he wins the Masters in 19, you begin, the word we have heard time and time again is sorry for Tiger. People began to feel sorry. They began to empathize with Tiger. And I think that's how we felt. And that's what, you know, Matt Hamachek and Matt Heineman, the two directors, and particularly Matt Hamachek, who did an incredible job on this as one of the primary director of it. We would have these conversations a lot about the same things that Jeff and I were going through, because he's looking at all these interviews and he's seeing what you're seeing and going, God, it's just really hard to like this guy right now. But in the end, what's the arc? How do you know, what do you want to leave people with when they're watching the credits? And I think that feeling of empathy is the one that we were really trying to convey, is we put you in his shoes in so many different places that in the end, I mean, you saw what happened at the Masters. You saw what's happening now after this latest accident. There's a tremendous amount of, I think, built up a sadness and empathy for Tiger right now. And you know, I think we're all kind of waiting to see what this next chapter of his life is going to look like.
Yeah, and I think part of it too, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this one, was because I feel this way about LeBron now. I feel like there is a lot of reporters or a lot of people who know information behind the scenes who are afraid to say anything. Therefore, you really never got a cohesive look at Tiger Woods' life because they were afraid if you got blackballed by Tiger Woods or his team, you weren't getting the story that week. And let's face it, he was the biggest story for close to 20 years.
You're right. And I think that the golf writers generally, and I've sat in a lot of those press conferences, first of all, they're not terribly conducive to asking a tough question because everything is very much media managed. You know, there's somebody sitting next to the golfer, the professional at the dais. You know, they single out people in the audience to ask a question. It's not like like being in an NFL locker room in the good old days, or being at the Final Four where you could raise your hand and ask a question, and you could ask a direct question. I think the golf writers in generally, it's a more congenial sport. They're more willing to just focus on the sport itself and not what's happening off the course. And then again, with Tiger, it was doubly complicated because Mark Steinberg, his agent, was so protective of Tiger that any kind of one-on-one interview, one-on-one situation, there was going to be a kind of a quid pro quo there for something that Tiger was promoting or the brand ambassador for. So you know you're on kind of shaky ground about asking tough questions. And without a doubt, if you got on the wrong side of Tiger Woods with a direct question, and I've seen him and I've heard him and I've read transcripts, the odds of you getting any kind of unique access are next to nothing. So all of that combined to kind of burnish Tiger's image and to really present the kind of image that everybody looked at and went, oh my God, he's living such an incredible life. And what a great person he is. And, all the things he does for charity and Tiger Woods Foundation. But, as we discovered and certainly in the doc, you see it, there were multiple sides of Tiger Woods' life. And as I think I said in the doc, at times there were 3 or 4 or 5 different lives that he was living. And those lives at a certain point in time intersected. And that's where, I think the computer, as we like to call him sometimes, just broke down. The circuits fried. And the first result was that accident on Thanksgiving in 2009.
Yeah, it's man, it's such a crazy rise and fall of an athlete. It's hard to compare him to anybody else. But again, if your book and the doc didn't come out and you saw what his childhood was like, well, yeah, most people end up emulating their father. And when he died in particular, it reminded me of when Jordan's dad died. And you go through this series of, trying to make up for this great loss that you have inside of you. And then you do all these wild shit, for lack of a better term. Most of my best friends are military. And so I knew the things that he was doing with the Navy SEALs and all that stuff behind the scenes, and also knew that he was getting hurt. And then we would hear wild stories behind the scenes about him. A check would come for a dinner that was $200, and there was 6 Navy SEALs sitting there at a dinner, and he would ask for separate checks.
Yeah. Can you believe that?
No, I couldn't.
And neither could they. So, that's Earl. It's interesting, right now there's a scripted series being developed, and I've seen the pilot episode, not seen the episode, but I've seen the script for the pilot episode. It'll probably be 7 or 8 episodes if it gets made, which I believe it will get made. But the pilot is really about Earl. He is the predominant character in the pilot. Tita shows up, Tiger's mom. Tiger's obviously, from a very early age through flashbacks, you see pictures of Tiger in certain situations. But it is a story of a father and a son. And it's a son learning from a father, and a father teaching a son certain things, both viscerally and very directly. So I've always found that to be, frankly, the most fascinating part of the Tiger Woods story is if you don't understand Earl Woods and you don't understand Tita Woods, you will never understand Tiger Woods.
Yeah, no, and look, I think most things in life come back to a father and a son, especially as a boy or a man growing up. And having gone through the loss of a father myself, it's a weird feeling that you can't really describe unless somebody else goes through it, and then you're able to discuss it. But men often don't talk about their feelings and things like that, so it gets brushed aside, and nobody ever knows, and you also don't know how it's going to affect them. Speaking of which, how did you get into the field of sports journalism? Did your father push you into it? Was he an athlete? How did you start?
No, I was, it's interesting. I had two real loves in life early on. One was reading. I loved to read. And the other one was sports. And I would say I was a much better than average athlete in high school. I was the most valuable player of a conference that had some really good players on a team that was like 30-3 our senior year, and 7 of us went to play college baseball from that one high school team. So I always had this love of sports. I grew up in Detroit, one of the great sports towns in America. But the love of reading transferred to a love of writing. And so I had a sort of an epiphany with David Halberstam, who wrote a book called The Best and the Brightest on the Vietnam War, which was a life-changing kind of an experience for me because of the kind of reporting that went into that book. And I was living through that period of time in the 60s with the Vietnam War. I believe I read it in my junior year in high school. And then I wrote for the high school paper. When I played baseball in college, I wrote for the college paper. And then I just kind of started that track. I graduated from San Diego State in 1976 with a degree in journalism. And, I started out at a weekly newspaper that was thrown on people's doorsteps on Wednesday afternoon called the Life News. And it was a shopper, and I was the sports editor. And the only reason I was the sports editor was because I was the only person in the sports department. So I got to name myself the sports editor and give myself a column. But I was there for 4 months, and then I went to a suburban daily in Escondido, California called the Times Advocate, which was owned by the Chicago Tribune at the time. And it was a very well-respected a suburban daily. And I wrote there for 2 years, covered everything from the Chargers to San Diego State to high school sports to you name it. And I really learned whether I really wanted to be a journalist. Because until you put your feet in the fire, everything looks really interesting. But when you have to write 1 or 2 stories a day, every day, and you're in your mid-20s and you're looking around going, okay, is this really what I want to do with my life? And the answer was I wasn't really sure. And so I took a break, and I worked for a sports public relations firm to see if I liked that, which I didn't. And then I just started writing for the San Diego Union and San Diego Magazine, freelancing, and sending my clips back to Sports Illustrated. And that went on for the better part of a year. I won some local writing awards in San Diego and for things that I wrote for the Union and for San Diego Magazine. And I just kept sending those clips back, and I was kind of a pain in the ass to Bambi Bachman, who was then the chief of researchers at SI. And in 1982, at a time when those jobs were, like diamonds, I got offered a job at SI and it was basically February of 1982. I'm in San Diego. I've been married for not quite 3 years. My wife is pregnant, 8 months pregnant with our first child. And I get an offer to go to New York to work for Sports Illustrated at 29 years old to make a grand total of $27,000 a year in 1982.
Oh, boy.
Not the most heartwarming prospect in the world. And I actually turned the job down. I had to turn it down. My wife said to me, who I'm still married to for 42 years, said to me, there's no way on God's green earth I'm moving to New York City in the dead of winter, 8 months pregnant. You can't take this job. Now, those jobs came along around once every blue moon, right?
Yeah.
Well, in April, they call back and they say, we've had another opening. We're going to offer you this job again. We're not asking a third time. And so I took it, and I actually left San Diego by myself and came to New York, stayed with friends for about 3 months, couch surfing and sleeping in my office sometimes at SI. Finally, my wife came in August, and that was the beginning of 7 years at the magazine, where I went from a fact checker basically at 29 years old to becoming the magazine's, I guess it's safe to say, their top investigative writer reporter for the magazine. And that led to another life-changing opportunity for me when I went to the Olympics with Mike Weissman at NBC to cover them in Seoul. When he put this group together called the Soul Searchers, it was some really interesting, high-powered sports reporters from around the country. That got me an audition at ABC News, and that got me hired by Roone Arledge. And that was the one. I mean, SI was, like hitting a grand slam. ABC News was like double that, because that was Peter Jennings, and it was Roone, and just an unbelievable cast of correspondents, Dick Schaap among them. And I got a PhD in how to write for television when I was there.
Have you remained a Detroit sports team? Like, is that still, are you Tigers, Lions? I had to ask.
Yeah, it's just awful right now. It's one continuous form of I don't even know what you'd call it. It's
self-loathing. I'm an Atlanta fan. Yep.
When you just, when I was at CBS Sports, I covered the Lions, because I was with Greg and Phil on the A games, but we'd always do the Thanksgiving Day game. And I went into Detroit that year, they were 0-16, and that was just like, we walked out of that building and Phil turned to me and he goes, "They got no chance to win here." None. Zero. Because of some of the people that we were interviewing, they just had, they had given up hope. It's so hard now. And I don't really follow sports the way I did in the past, because I just have other things that are going on in my life. But I still look at the Pistons, the bad boys, and how great they were. Part of a book I did called Money Players with Harvey Ayrton and a guy by the name of Martin Dardis from the magazine. There was a chapter on, and I just learned a lot about the bad boys from Bill Laimbeer and Joe Dumars and Vinnie Johnson. And that was a group that, if you love sports, you love the way that they attacked the game and the way they played the game. And then, I've had my heart broken several times with the Tigers and people like that. So,
well, the Tigers in the 80s though they had Alan Trammell.
They had a nice run.
Kirk Gibson.
Yeah, they had a nice run not that long ago. Maybe the greatest rotation to never win a World Series in that. Scherzer and Verlander, and there was a third Cy Young winner on that too that I'm blanking on. But yeah, God, those teams.
It's just, I was a Tiger fan in the 60s, when they won in 68. And, I can pretty much name that starting lineup off the top of my head. And Al Kaline was just an idol when I was growing up. He was a hero. And then, Gibson and some Trammell and Whitaker and those Tiger teams were, Petrie and some of those guys that really played the game hard. But I've also been to Tiger games where I've watched people in right field jog across that field or walk from right field to a dugout. When I watched Al Kaline sprint from right field into the dugout every single inning of every single game of his life. And those are the kind of players I don't really want to watch. I'm not interested in that kind of effort.
So I actually have a question about player body language here. You were on the sideline for the famous Brady tuck.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What was the reaction on the ground? Whose sideline were you by, and how were the players?
Patriots sideline, and I was there when I saw, which I think is still the greatest clutch kick in the history of the NFL, was Vinatieri's 2-iron from whatever it was, 40 some yards away with that wind and that cold.
Oh yeah.
That scene. I was absolutely gobsmacked when he made it, because I didn't think there was a chance in hell that thing was going to go through the goalposts. And then, it was just chaos. And, when you're on the field, the one thing you don't want to do in a situation like that is is open your mouth, because you know, until the producer says to you, Armen, what's going on down there? Because you know, in that situation, Mark Wolf, who was the producer, who I've worked with in so many games, I just knew that he had to have control of the situation, and he was talking to Greg and Phil to kind of figure out how they were going to play the results of the review. And it was just, I mean, again, it was just one of those moments where your jaw drops open and you're like, oh my God, they're going to win this game now. And it was, you know, we did a lot of Patriots games, and I spent a lot of time in the Patriots locker room in much of their run of their 6 Super Bowls. I was never around a more professional sports franchise than I was when there was, and I know I'm going to miss some, but it's Junior Seau, Rodney Harrison, Richard Seymour, Tom Brady, Mike Vrabel, Ty Law, Lawyer Malloy, just an incredible group. Teddy Bruschi, number one, just an incredible group of professionals. And that's a word that, you know, gets tossed around a lot, I think. But that was the most professional football team I'd ever seen. And I mean, they would do things like have contests to see how much water they could drink during the day. So hydration contests, just to see, you know, who was the best one. And Tom, who we saw in his rookie year, and when he won the Super Bowl, and we saw him in the following year, where Tom was kind of overwhelmed with the fame and the celebrity and the obligations and Sexiest Man Alive on People magazine and all that stuff. He got set straight by Charlie Weiss, who was the offensive coordinator at the time. And I'll never forget, Charlie said to Tom, you know, there's a difference between what you want to do and what you have to do. And what you have to do is be in here every day, the first guy in, the last guy to leave. You have to set the tone and send a message to all of your teammates that you're all in on this thing. And this is the most important thing in your life. And that changed Tom. And I think, you know, you're seeing the results of that now. What he did in Tampa Bay is exactly what, you know, he did in New England, which was to put up a shingle and say, you know, the bullshit's done here now. This is how we're going to prepare. And this is the bar that I'm going to set for every single person in this organization. And there are not a lot of people that can do that. I mean, Peyton Manning was one for sure. I think Michael Jordan was one. You know, I go back to the Isaiah Thomases in Detroit. Those people did that. Those athletes are so rare. And it's just a pleasure to be around them when you see the impact that they can have on people who think they're working, you know. Yeah,
one person you didn't name there was LeBron James. Just out of curiosity, why? Yeah.
Yeah, I think LeBron, in fact, Jeff Benedict, who you know, I've written 2 big books with, is now working on a book about LeBron. And he's, I don't know now, I think about a year into it. I mean, he's very impressed. And I don't know LeBron. I literally, the only thing I know about LeBron in a personal sense was I actually was covering the decision. I covered the decision for CBS or ABC, I forget which year it was, at Greenwich High School, not far from where I live in Connecticut. And that was a debacle from the word go. And yeah, I can just remember going, what the hell is going on here? You know, and I know Jim Gray, and I have a lot of respect for Jim. And I still to this day don't know. I haven't read Jim's book. I'm sure it's probably in there, but to this day, I don't know what the hell they were thinking, you know, to wait that long before he decided to take his talents to
South Beach. Yeah. I saw a special on that whole thing. I forget what it was. But you know, there was cutaways to Jim Gray during the commercial breaks, and you can see him saying, all right, so what do you want me to ask about here? They hadn't even given him any talking points or nothing.
Questions. Yeah. I'm 3 questions in and I'm running out of questions.
Yeah. And they still have an hour to fill. And he's just like, what do you do? What do you do? What do you do? The whole thing was so poorly put together. They didn't think much about it. And then LeBron gets on a plane afterwards. He doesn't know that the whole world hates him until he lands. Like it's a crazy story.
Well, we hated him. I can tell you that. I was standing outside Greenwich High School trying to, and I got everybody and their mother in my ear asking me, so where's he going? What's his decision? What's his decision? I'm like, I don't know. You're watching it just like I am. I have no idea. It's just it's a world-class shit show at this point in time.
Speaking of world-class shit shows, where were you during the OJ run when he was in the Bronco and all that stuff? That just popped on 2 days ago on like a 30 for 30, and I ended up watching. I for whatever reason, that OJ story, I just get locked in forever.
I was at ABC News, but I remember I was in a bar in Pontiac, Michigan, watching what I think was the NBA, trying to get to the NBA Finals.
They were in it. They were in it. Yeah, it was during the game.
NBA Finals. I'm in this bar with some of my best friends from Detroit, and we're just hanging out. I've got a weekend off. I don't know. I was in Detroit for some reason, and then I'm like, what? Oh, a Bronco, OJ? And then, the room just went dead silent after that and watching it. And then I was at ABC and, I was around with Rune and I remember the one thing of the many things that Rune Arledge had, he had an incredible ability to understand big moments. And he knew right from the start that this was going to rearrange kind of the furniture in America in terms of celebrity and this fascination with watching other people's lives disintegrate sometimes in front of you, which has become, I think, kind of a pro sport in our world these days. But I do remember, I remember being at Doug Looney's house, who was a senior writer at Sports Illustrated in Boulder, Colorado, when Aaron Brown, who was covering the OJ trial for us, and when you're in that business and you're a correspondent and you're doing these big stories, like when I covered Sandusky and that whole thing, all I thought about was what I was going to write, the next script I was going to write, the next thing I was going to do for that story. That was as big a moment for a television correspondent as you possibly get. And you could have taken a big swing and a miss on a just the facts kind of script. Aaron wrote this 3-part opera that literally, I think, was about 9 minutes of the network television of World News Tonight that night, when there's 21 minutes overall in a show. And I just remember just being awestruck by the fact that how in the hell did he come up with all that? And I spoke to him later on about it. I said, how did that come to you? Because it was really operatic. He goes, I would drive around LA in the middle of the night on the freeways when they were empty, and all I would do was think in my head about different ways to start this. I knew this was going to be a 3-act play I was going to write, and in the end, he pulled it off in ways that, anybody that can find that at this point in time that loves television writing, I would get it, because it was just masterful. So that's a long-winded way of saying, I didn't have an answer for your question.
He's won 11. You won 11 Emmys,
yeah.
And you don't have an answer for the question.
It was honestly, though, a great professional sounding non-answer. Like, it was very articulate. It was the most articulate non-answer I've ever heard in my life.
It sounded like every athlete.
Yeah.
Yeah, every athlete on the sideline. We gave it 110%. We're going to take it a day at a time, and
had a few of those. Yeah,
I'm sure you've had millions of them. I say this all the time. Our hardest interviews on all of these shows, because we own a media company, it's about 15, 16 shows, is athletes. It's the same.
Current athletes,
correct. Same stock standard answers for all this shit. NFL players are the worst by far. They can't say or do anything. And then as it's gone by.
I put some professional golfers up there.
Oh, yeah.
I've watched them. And I'm like, I don't know. I think I know who you are, but you sound like 15 other guys. And I like to listen to PGA Tour radio on Sirius, because I'm a big golf fan. But honest to God, whether it was Adam Hadwin or the bell of the ball for the week, it's like, well, I just hit it really good today. I made some putts, and I'm just working on just trying to keep my game under control, not get too high, not get too low. I'm going to be out there tomorrow trying to go low again, but you never know in this game. Things can change. Like, wow, that is so insightful. Thank you so much.
Well, and I think that's what people love about this Bryson DeChambeau,
Brooks Koepka.
Brooks Koepka. Yeah. I mean, this thing is
something. Thank God. It's like, I mean, say what you want about Tiger, but Tiger made you, you wanted to watch Tiger Woods, and I'm a big fan of golf on Sunday afternoon. I really like it's kind of a relaxing thing to me to do. I don't have to get too involved in it, and I love the sport. But man, oh man, thank God for Brooks and he, pulling Bryson along for the ride, and Phil's. I mean, look where Phil is now. He's the go-to guy for sound, more so than anybody. And even a guy like Ricky Fowler, who's really struggled because he's so personable, is another go-to guy. And then, I just think that Rory is another one that people rely on to offer an opinion and insight that doesn't sound like it came out of, Scholastic magazine or something. So, I don't really, I mean, but they don't seem to care. I think right now with, there's so much betting going on, and golf is such a big gambling sport right now. It doesn't really matter. I think you can say that about 8 or 10 other sports at this point in time, but golf certainly has really attracted a lot of action.
Yeah, we've got one of our producers, Delco Dan, here off screen. He has called 6 winners this year. The last one you did, you put $25 on. Who was it? Cam Davis. Yeah, he won.
No way.
Yeah. And he showed me the betting slip. So like he hosts a show with us as well. And I've never seen anything like it. But it's all these weird people that I've never, who was the guy before that like, I've never even heard that fucking guy's name. You got that one too. Yeah. It's the craziest shit ever, but you're right. I think the future of all of this is sports gambling across the board. I've never been shy about it here on this network. I mean, you can bet on everything. The live betting is fun. All of it.
I was just in Vegas. I'm working on something that has to do with sports betting. And I was at South Point with Jimmy Vaccaro. I spent time with Richie Bacciolari and Nick Bodanovich. And that's like, the holy trinity of sports handicappers in this country. And I was with Nick when he was looking at screens because he's, with Caesars and William Hill, he run their entire book operation, and it was a Clippers game, and it was the over/under. It was like 222, and some guy put $20,000 on the over, and Nick's looking at it in real time, and he doesn't move the line at all. He goes, "Yeah, that guy's a square. I don't worry about him. He couldn't pick his nose right, that kind of thing."
Yeah.
And another guy came in at $1,000 that was a real sharp, and at 222. The over, and Nick immediately moved his line to 222.5. And so it was fascinating to be in their world. It's just right now with all the computer betting, the computer modeling that's going on, it is so hard to get any kind of advantage on a line these days, particularly in the NFL, because the lines are so good. Baseball may be different, because there's so many games and the matchups are, can be weird, but
baseball's hard to.
Baseball's hard. I like to go with baseball. I don't even really mess with the games. I'll do player props.
Yep.
Strikeouts, stuff like that. There is one thing we've done, the Golf Better producer we're talking about, and myself look at a lot. College football, it still has, you still have a bit of an advantage statistically if you use the right places. I don't know if you're familiar with Bill Connolly from ESPN, the S&P Plus.
No, but there's a lot of models. I'm working with some people that are really smart, and their models I've seen their models, and they're put together by people that are graduated at the top of their class at Caltech.
Oh yeah.
Those kinds of people. they can't put their pants on the same way every day,
Yeah.
but they can put a number together.
Yeah.
You know.
I'm really great at college and NFL. I went 83%. It was either last year or the year before in college. I mean, it was just off the charts to the point where our sponsor was like, "Hey, dude, can you start missing some of these?" What helped me out, and I'm curious if this helped you along the years or if you bet at all or whatever, was actually being on the field. So we get field passes for all of this stuff. Obviously, I'm not Sports Illustrated or anywhere near your world. However, being able to see these athletes up close and personal, especially in college, there's such a huge difference in body type that it's, once I saw them and I was standing next to them on the field, I was able to pick winners better. Because like Trevor Lawrence, for example, a couple years ago, I was standing on the field next to him. He looked tall and skinny on TV, and then when I saw him in real life, the guy has the perfect quarterback NFL body, and he was like 20 years old at that point, and I'm like, oh my God, he's going to destroy everyone. And I started betting on Trevor Lawrence.
Well, let me say up front, I don't gamble. It's a vice I don't have. And I'm, as part of this process that I'm going through now, I'm learning a lot more than I've ever learned before. But that being said, you're right. I was on the field. I was working on the system, and I was on the field when Alabama played Notre Dame in the national championship. I think it was
2012.
2012. I came out of the tunnel. Notre Dame. I had seen Alabama play Georgia in the SEC championship, and I knew I just knew what kind of physical football team they were. I looked at Notre Dame and I saw Manti Te'o as their star linebacker. If I was a betting man, I would have bet my house on Alabama. Just being the absolute, the stark physical differences between the two football teams. It looked like a varsity football team and a junior varsity football team. And you can see it in NFL games. You can see the physical difference between certain football teams, or you can see a physical difference when, like, for example, when I was in Nashville covering a Tennessee Titans Baltimore Ravens game, when Steve McNair and Eddie George were the stars of the Titans, and Eddie would come out of the locker room with his shirt off, this 6'4" Adonis, running around the field, lathering up a sweat, just kind of giving Ray Lewis and the rest of the Baltimore Ravens an idea of what they were in for all day long with him. And those games, Eddie, when I talked to him about it, he goes, it was like the Visigoths. There was in the old days where you'd have a turkey leg in your hand and you just put it in your mouth and you rip it off, and then you'd go to war. That's what those football games were like. And now in college, you can see the difference, certainly, particularly with the power teams like the Alabamas of the world, the Georgias of the world.
Ohio State.
Ohio State for sure. I mean, I'm a graduate, as said, at San Diego State, and I've seen San Diego State's football team up close, and they just don't compare physically to any of the teams that are in the Big Ten or the SEC or even the ACC. And that's just a byproduct of where they recruit from and the kind of athletes they're getting. San Diego State has a lot of good athletes, just don't have as many of them, and they're not as big and as well built.
Yeah.
Speaking of recruiting, I just want to know, you covered college football and recruiting scandals and everything like that in the 80s, especially, right? During SMU and all that.
Miami was out of control.
What's the craziest shit you've seen in terms of getting those athletes to those schools?
Well, I think, one of the things we heard, and I could never prove it, though I don't doubt it, was that there were certain SEC schools where there would be one prominent booster that would have a function at his house where he would invite 20 of his closest friends, boosters of that particular program, an assistant coach would go to the house. There'd be a dinner, there'd be drinks, steaks, whatever. And then they would retire to a certain room where on a board was a listing of all the athletes, the really transformative, game-changing athletes that this particular school wanted to recruit. And each of those men, as part of their the entry of coming to the house, they would bring a case with $100,000 in cash in it. So if you multiply 20 times 100,000, that gives you a pretty good slush fund to get the kind of athletes that you're looking for off the books, right? So it's this whole risk reward scenario that goes on in big time college football. And I know enough about the NCAA's enforcement division to know that they are just really swimming upstream in trying to ferret out the corruption, first of all, find it, ferret it out, and then prove it. And everything now is a cash business. So that to me is kind of like, I've heard a lot of different numbers. There was a tight end at A&M that his father said, the going price was $600,000 for him, and that's a tight end. And he ended up going to A&M, and the father said they never took any money. But there were 2 SEC schools that were willing to outbid A&M every day of the week to get this kid to come and play for them. So I just think if you look at college basketball, what the rewards are to make it to a Final Four or even to a Sweet 16 or an Elite 8, and now with 12 teams likely going into a college football playoff, I mean, thank God, I think in a lot of ways for name, image, and likeness, because it's gonna give the kids the kind of cash that they need to survive and more. But I think in some ways, it's going to open the doors in ways for people to say, okay, well, the corruption is kind of going to go on top of the table now in certain ways, because if you want to give somebody $50,000 to come sign autographs at your car dealership for a series of weekends, then that money, that's the incentive maybe to come to the school rather than just a straight up cash deal to get there. Though I wouldn't for a second doubt that, those offers will also be made in some places.
Oh yeah. Cause I mean, look, I heard Johnny Manziel over the weekend saying, dude, if they had opened it up like they have now, he goes, dude, I would have gotten the bag. Him, Reggie Bush, all those guys, but you're right.
Bo Jackson, think about Bo Jackson.
Boy,
I mean, God.
Man, yeah, because I'm with you. Now it's going to be biggest boosters win. And I still think the programs that you mentioned will still be on top because they have the most money. It'll be in Ohio State. It'll be in Alabama. It'll be the SEC schools who are able to afford these kids and say the exact same thing. Hey, we've got a booster down the street running a car dealership. Come down, do a couple giveaways on the weekends, the day after the game, sign some autographs, and then we'll pay you that way. I don't know how the smaller schools can compete with that kind of money unless they have
and they can't compete with the $40 million that comes in through the regional television networks. And that's to me has been that infusion of cash into the big time programs, whether it's the Big Ten, the ACC, certainly the SEC, Pac-12. That's fueled the coaching salaries. It's fueled this continuing industrial arms race and facilities where everybody's got to out, jacuzzi or out you sleeping bed and in the locker room kind of thing. And rightly so in a lot of ways. I mean, I for the longest time, I was not in favor of paying athletes because I just felt like it was a Pandora's box that once it was open, you were never going to be able to control it. But I think now the money is so high, and the fact that this is a 47 weeks a year job in these major college programs, they get 4 or 5 weeks off if they're not conditioning, if they're not in training camp, if they're not in fall camp, if they're not in the season, if they're not in the playoffs. It's an unbelievable grind. At the same time, they're trying to get an education. And that to me is worth whatever they can figure out how these players should be compensated. And, to me, it's so funny. It's an aside, but I think it's important. the day that, sort of Independence Day, the day that the name, image, and likeness ground shifted, Sonny Vaccaro called me because we have a long history together with the Ed O'Bannon case, and Michael Hosfeld, who was the attorney that really was at the heart of the Alston case and everything else. And Sonny had gotten thousands or hundreds of calls and texts during the day. But I was so grateful that he called me, because we go back a long ways on that story. And because I'd always been pushing to get that on the network and pushing to get it on, to get national coverage of what was happening with Sonny and Ed. And, that was just a ground shifting day. And it's going to be fascinating to see what's going to happen going forward, because, the word chaos keeps getting used, but I think it's a pretty good word, because I think it's going to be absolutely chaotic until they can kind of find some sort of common ground between the schools and between the states and the conferences.
Yeah, because right now you have Barstool Sports over the weekend just saying, hey, we're open for business. Who wants to be here? Thousands of athletes, college athletes, and applications to join Barstool Sports.
They were taking it. It wasn't just football and basketball.
No, it was everybody. It was every sport.
And male and female. It was like women's
Soccer,
volleyball players.
volleyball,
guys, soccer player. Like, it was wild.
Yeah. So I don't know how you police it. The other thing that I wonder about it is, if you start making great cash, what's the incentive to keep playing hard and practicing and all that other stuff? Because that's going to eat into your practice time when you're worried about getting these deals done so you can start making money from a Barstool or even us, because we've talked about it behind the scenes over here.
Yeah, I think I don't think anybody, honestly, of all the years I've covered sports, it's going on now, 40 years. This is the single biggest seismic shift in the landscape of college sports that I've ever seen. And when the ground opens up and things start to topple and move, you really have no idea what's going to fall in and who's going to stay on stable ground. And it's going to be fascinating to see what's going to happen in the next year or so, or even longer, as athletes try to cash in, schools try to rein it in, boosters. There's a whole now, and I just, on my Twitter feed, there's just a whole culture of companies now that are doing all these NFTs, they're doing crypto, they're doing name, image, and likeness deals for these athletes. And I didn't even know those people existed until about a week ago.
Oh, yeah.
Now there's this whole cottage industry where in a matter of hours, sometimes you can make tens of thousands of dollars for an image. And that, to me, is, as a college football coach right now, or a college basketball coach, I might well be just crawled up in a corner and just going, I'll see you in like 3 years. I don't know what's going to happen.
We have Chuck Liddell's on our network, and we have his show on our network, and he just did an NFT deal. And I was like, how much is that? And once they told me the number, I was like, oh my God. And Chuck's like, yeah, dude, I'll stand there. Let's take some photos.
No kidding. I know, it's amazing. But look, it is what it is. And in a lot of ways, the NCAA brought this on itself. They could have come up with a plan a long time ago. They could have put a match to the whole amateurism charade that was going on. They've spent untold millions of dollars defending an indefensible position regarding amateurism in college sports. And, the fact that Mark Emmert is still leading this association, to me, it boggles my mind. And I know it boggles the minds of a lot of really prominent athletic directors and people of influence in college sports. And, I don't think the NCAA has done itself any good in how it's handled.
Does it ever?
Yeah.
From the O'Bannon case.
Does it ever is the question, is like, no.
Not really.
No.
It's an upset when they actually get something right, and I have a lot of friends there still, and I have a lot of respect for the job that the enforcement division is trying to do, but it's really almost next to impossible. So, and the money keeps pouring in, the fact that the CBS contract with Turner is about $1 billion a year, which runs that organization. They're not going to, one second, that's just going to tell my wife, I'll call you later. So, we'll see. I mean, this 12-team playoff, as I mentioned, it'll just be bonkers, if it goes to 12, which I don't think there's any reason to believe that it won't.
No, financially, that's what all the networks want. That's what the colleges want. And I don't even think the top schools like the Ohio States, the Alabamas, and all those guys care, because they're still getting a bye, and then they're going to play an easy team. They're still going to be in the same spot they were, so it's not really going to affect them either. It seems to be a win-win for everybody else, and nobody bitches
about 15 games. So, you're playing almost an NFL season now for a college player, and
right.
That just is, to me, it's torturous. I'm close to the Alabama program, and what goes on down there, and I have such great respect for Nick and what he does. But they work down there. They work every single day, and the pressure, I know talking to, I'm close with Terry, his wife, and it's just an enormous amount of pressure that you stack. And Nick and Terry can handle it because they've been doing it for so long, but you're stacking so much pressure on top of these athletes now. And yes, they're going to get paid, they're going to get compensated, but still it doesn't, in the days of social media now, I don't think it's going to do them any good in terms of, a fumble or an interception or the wrong play at the wrong time, especially when you tack on legalized sports betting. Good luck with that.
So, look, sometimes you have to yell at a child for costing you $3,000.
That's what made Tiger Woods so good.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Sometimes you just got to scream at children.
Yeah.
Who you don't know.
And then flipping this over into sports journalism, like, I felt like you were in the golden era of it. Because now you can't say or do anything, especially at ESPN. I mean, we're seeing what's happening with Rachel Nichols and all that other stuff today. I felt like you were in the best of it. But I've heard some journalists say, no, you guys are heading into it because of the money that's involved in podcasts. Now, Dan Le Batard just got 3 years, $50 million. I know what Pat McAfee's deal is. How do you view it personally?
Well, I'm very grateful that I grew up when I grew up, and I got to Sports Illustrated in '82 when, it was a murderer's row of some of the best writers. And you can start with Frank DeFord and Curry Kirkpatrick, and Rick Riley was there, Kenny Moore, William Oscar Johnson. I mean, Doug Looney, Jack McCallum. I mean, it was just this, Sally Jenkins was there for a while. It was just an incredible, Dan Jenkins. It was an incredible group. And I was really grateful to be part of that, under Gil Rogan and then Mark Mulvoy. The television side of things, I had a 30-year run in network television, which is, I think, really unusual in these days to be at that level for so long, to do pieces for 60 Minutes, to do pieces for 10 years for Real Sports. Mm-hmm. I'm just really grateful that I had an opportunity to work with people where the journalism came first, to try to tell the story as fairly and as accurately and as sometimes emotionally as humanly possible. I have a bit of a crusader in me when it comes to issues, because I covered a lot of issues. So yeah, I think I was lucky. I got the, I got everything that I could ever want out of the business in terms of the television side and the journalism side. I don't have a podcast. I've been talked to by a lot of people about doing one. I think it's easy to say yes to. It's really hard to do well. Really hard to do well. And there's so many of them now. To be able to cut through in that, and you guys know, here I am talking to you. I just think it's really hard to do, and I'm not going to do something unless I can do it as well as I possibly can. But I just think there's just so much noise right now that it's really hard to cut through in a way that's meaningful and important. Like I read Dan Wetzel every time Dan Wetzel writes something, because I think he's the best sports columnist in America. I think Sally Jenkins is, if Dan is 1, Sally's 1A. There's other people, Greg Bishop from Sports Illustrated. I'll read anything that Greg writes. Karen Krause from the New York Times, Sam Farmer from the LA Times. They're just total pros in what they're doing. I have more issues with people that are just spouting off opinions based on little or no facts, trying to make a name for themselves by igniting somebody else's life for their own personal benefit. That's not the kind of journalism I want to be part of, and thank God I wasn't part of it. So, but I still have a deep belief that at its core, there are a lot of people doing really good work right now, and it's just harder for those people to rise up to the point where they're being heard, because they're being drowned out by so much other noise that I just find to be, it's just unprofessional in a lot of ways.
Do you think that's the sheer volume of it? Because I mean, back in your day, there's Sports Illustrated, and I can't even think of another sports magazine.
Well, there was no cable, there was no
streaming. There was no cable. It was Inside Sports. It was Sports Illustrated. For a while, it was the Sporting News. Before that, went to Funk. Yeah, I mean, now, here we are talking, on a podcast. I just don't know how you. It's really like for the Levitards of the world to cut through, for some of the other really primary podcasters to cut through, for you guys to have all the networks that you have. That's really unusual. And I'm talking to some pretty high-powered people these days to see what I might do next. And my whole thing is how are we going to cut through? Even though there's some big name people behind it, it's like, even with the big names, and even with you have a big streaming service, or even if you have a great idea, man, oh man, to break through is really hard in a positive way. You can break through and self-immolate in a day. And that's, at this point in time, honestly, all I can do is say something stupid one time and put an end to an award-winning,
brilliant career.
Yeah. And go one day, and then that's the first line in your obituary. And I've seen that happen to people that I have great respect for. And I really kind of live in fear of doing something like that, where I would have an opinion that would cut across perhaps the current feelings on certain subjects, and then you just get crucified, and it's just not worth it at this point in time. I don't need the adjective,
Yeah, I understand. It's sports. I can tell you the way to break through now. Everything revolves around gambling.
So you're on the right track there.
Yeah, because if you can pick winners, like that's how our sports show became successful, was picking winners on that. On the other side of it, I started podcasts 7 years ago, so it was kind of new-ish to the field, and then it grew after that. But got lucky with picking the election. I picked 2016, every single state, and except for Pennsylvania, for Trump. And then that kind of took off, and I was one of few people to do that. And then celebrity guests and things like that, things go viral and whatnot. But you're right. How do you cut through the noise and when there's over 800,000 podcasts out there? And yeah,
I don't know how you do it in a way that, because the temptation is, and I understand it, the temptation is to just raise the volume, because that will, the louder you yell, is it the more likely you'll be heard, or are you just part of a crowd that's yelling so loud that nobody gets heard? I don't really know the answer to that, but I find oftentimes that when you speak lower, when you lower the volume and you actually have something to say and you say it in the right place, it has a bigger impact. And that's really hard to do. And so that's where, like, my next projects are the kinds of things, when they come out, they're big, and they're going to be, I think, presented in a certain way where people will notice. But we got lucky with Tiger Woods, I think, in a lot of ways. Things that happened in his life as the book was coming out. I know a lot of people that have written great books that, in fact, they're stacked in my office that nobody's read. And that's because, the wheel turns the wrong way for you sometimes.
Yeah. If you want my advice, to me, like, you're such a legend, I wouldn't even risk it. I really would. Like, I'm being dead serious. Like, if you're rich enough, with somebody like you, who is literally an all fucking timer, don't risk it on some shitbag show like mine, you know, because like I'm the loudest. That's why I'm able to cut through and everything else. And I wouldn't risk it if I were you.
Smart. And that's the thing. The other thing is, that's not a bad combination. Loud and smart is actually pretty good. I mean, Stephen A. has done an amazing job of being loud and smart on a lot of things. Loud and sometimes not so smart in other broadcasts. You're just like, you're just on too much. You know, you cannot be this prepared all the time. And so you're relying on producers, or you're relying on just off the top of your head. And that's where you say shit that you just can't, you know, defend, honestly, in the end. And so to me, it's like, you're right. It's like, I say less now. And I, at times, have had points I want to make on Twitter about certain programs, particularly football programs. And I don't do it because I don't want to deal with the
backlash.
Well, no tweet has ever been worth it.
Ever in the history of man. Yeah.
No.
Nope.
Ever.
No. And with you, honestly, you're so great. Just don't risk it. Because like if you died tomorrow, you would be a legend. I was
take my clothes off here too. So that's right.
Real quick, because I know you're a busy guy and you got to get out of here. Two more questions for you. One, was there a moment or a game or an event that you were at that you forgot you were a reporter and you were just a fan and you were like, oh my God, I can't believe what's happening right now?
That's a good question. There's been a lot of times I've been absolutely awed by what I saw. I mean, I go back to, when the Patriots beat the Carolina Panthers in the Super Bowl. I was on the sidelines in Houston for that, and that huge second half where the Patriots, both teams were just playing lights out. And I was like, oh my God, this is as good as it gets. I've seen some AFC championship games, which I always felt were played. I always kind of compared them to planes. Like preseason was a prop plane, would just kind of putter and nobody wanted to get hurt. Regular season was sort of a regional jet that would take you from one to another. The playoffs, the beginning of the playoffs would be sort of that cross-country flight. The AFC championship games were like the Concorde. They were like supersonic. They were played at such speeds and such intensity that I saw some people get run over. Like I saw Mo Lewis run into Terrell Davis when Terrell was the man and Mo was a beast, just as a linebacker for the Jets. The sound of that collision, I thought somebody had died. I mean, I was like, I literally, my microphone was always off, but I remember saying, oh my God, I don't know whether Terrell's going to get up. And he just popped right up like, he had run into a telephone pole, but came out and everything was fine. That, and I think watching Lance Armstrong in the Tour de France, whether it was on Alpe d'Huez or whether it was on one of the other, just these epic climbs that he would make. And we always knew there was a point in the tour where Lance was basically going to turn around to the peloton and everybody that was chasing him and going, I'll see you later. Basically, fuck you. I'm going to win the race right here. And those were the kind of moments where you go, I'm watching whatever Lance's personal stuff, and I have thoughts about that, but it was epic to watch him and everybody was amazing. The Tour de France is filled with riders that are just otherworldly, but to see him just turn around and basically go, okay, now you're going to see Lance Armstrong. That was pretty awe-inspiring. And because I wasn't covering that with a microphone in my hand, I was doing it for CBS for a big show on Sunday. That's where I could kind of get lost in the crowds and lost in the moment. But the one thing you do when you do a lot of these games is you never forget you're on television. Because if you, for one moment, say the wrong thing or do something stupid, there's millions of people that are going to find out about that in about 3 seconds. So.
Okay. And then last question for you here. Who was your favorite athlete of all time to interview? I know everybody's got one. Who was the best interview for you that you enjoyed the most?
Well, when he was ready to engage, and he did sometimes, Peyton Manning is about as good as it gets. And for me to talk to somebody about the game, and understanding football, I'm just trying to think of. Well, I can tell you, when Nick Saban wants to engage, and go to places where he talks about his father and he talks about Bear and he talks about, what it's like to really, what greatness is all about. I could sit and talk to Nick for hours on end because I always walk away from him inspired to want to, like what you were saying before, my career has been built on, always wanted to be the best of the best. I wasn't interested in just being the best. I wanted to be the best of a generation or be remembered for certain kinds of reporting and certain kinds of integrity and credibility. And I'm drawn to people like that. I'm drawn to the Tom Brady's of the world, the Peytons of the world, the Knicks of the world, the Bill Belichick's of the world, who aren't around just to be the best of their generation. They're around to be the best of all time. And I'm not putting myself in that category, but I'm saying that I did strive for that. And in striving for that, then good things happen, I think.
Yeah, and in my opinion, you really are, and you did it. So I wouldn't risk it on a podcast or somewhere else or on a tweet. Everything you're doing is correct. Yes, I would.
Yeah. No need to burn down a national treasure.
No, you're good to go. Yeah. This is the point in the show we get to the Drinkin' Bro of the week, who is someone who has inspired you or helped you become the person you are today. Who would you like to give the Drinkin' Bro of the week to?
I'd like to give it to a guy by the name of James Hinga. James Hinga was my journalism teacher in 10th grade at Lasser High School in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan. And he's the guy that first lit the fire for me. That was it when he, and that was the Watergate era, that just, the beginning of that. And so I dedicated one of my books to him, James Hinga. So if he's still around and still alive and listening to this, thanks, Jim.
Awesome. And thank you, Armen, for being here today.
Thanks,
it was
really enjoyed it. Thank
absolute
you so much.
Pleasure. Legend, and look, childhood hero, and I'm getting to do some of the stuff you got to do, but I will never reach the heights that you did.
Raising the bar. That's the way to do it.
I appreciate it. Thank you for being here today. For Hot Bob, Armen, I'm Ross Patterson. This is Drinkin' Bros Sports. Good night, everyone.